My son smirked when he said it, like he was delivering a harmless detail, not cutting something vital out of me. "You're not coming to the wedding, Mother." He stood in my kitchen, clean suit, confident posture, already halfway gone. In that moment, I understood something clearly and without drama. He wasn't afraid of hurting me. He was certain I would endure it. I am 72 years old. I have learned to recognize certainty in people. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain much. He didn't need to. He said the venue was very specific, the guest list carefully curated, the atmosphere important for his future. He spoke the way men speak when they believe they are being reasonable. He avoided my eyes, not out of shame, but convenience. I asked one question, just one. "Have you already told everyone I'm not coming?" He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "It's easier this way." That word stayed with me. Easier. Easier for whom, I wondered, as I stood there in my house, the one with the narrow hallway and the old clock that still ticked too loudly at night. The house I paid off 30 years ago. The house he learned to walk in. The house he now visited like a guest who expected coffee but never offered to help wash the cup. He reminded me that his fiance's family was very particular, that appearances mattered, that people asked questions. He said I wouldn't feel comfortable anyway. He said it gently, as if he were protecting me from something unpleasant, not pushing me out of my own place in his life. I nodded. I have nodded my whole life. Nodding keeps conversations short. It keeps sons calm. When he left, he kissed my cheek the way you kiss an elderly aunt at a funeral. Quick, careful, relieved it's over. I watched him walk down the path without looking back. He didn't notice the loose stone near the gate. He never notices such things. He assumes the ground will always hold. I made tea. I always make tea when I don't know what else to do with my hands. The kettle screamed louder than necessary. I let it. Some sounds deserve to exist. On the table lay the wedding invitation I had never officially received. It arrived by mistake, sent to my address with my name missing, just household. Cream paper, gold edges, elegant restraint. I studied it like a document from a country I no longer belonged to. I was not angry. That surprised me. Anger is noisy. What I felt was quiet, solid, and unfamiliar, like standing up after sitting too long and realizing your legs still work. I thought of all the practical things that still needed doing that day. The pharmacy, the bank, a call I had postponed for weeks. Life, it turned out, did not stop because I had been uninvited from it. That evening, I folded the invitation once, neatly, and placed it in the drawer where I keep important papers. Deeds. Statements. The envelope with my will, last updated years ago, back when I still believed love and gratitude aged at the same pace. I did not cry that night. I slept deeply, like someone who has finally understood what is required of her. If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not from worry, not from sadness, from clarity. It settles in the body differently, like cool air in a room that has been stuffy for years. I dressed simply. Gray slacks, a soft cardigan, shoes I could walk in without thinking about my feet. I have never trusted important decisions to uncomfortable shoes. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked the same as always. Lined face, steady eyes, white hair pinned back the way I like it. No visible sign that something had shifted. That is how real change usually looks. I checked my calendar. The wedding planner's number was written there, neat and careful, next to the date I was no longer expected to attend. I did not cross it out. I do not erase facts just because they hurt. Instead, I picked up my handbag and went out. The bank was quiet at that hour. A few retirees, a young couple whispering over a loan application, a teller who recognized me immediately. I have been with that bank longer than most of its employees have been alive. There is a comfort in being known without explanation. While I waited, I thought about how many times I had sat in places like this for my son. Student loans. A first car. A business idea that never made it past the enthusiasm stage. I signed papers without asking too many questions because he was my child, and I believed support was a form of love. When my turn came, I asked for a private room. My voice didn't tremble. That surprised the young man who escorted me, as if he expected hesitation from someone my age. People often confuse age with fragility. It is a convenient mistake. I asked to review my accounts. All of them. Not because I didn't know what was there, but because I wanted to see it laid out plainly. Numbers have a way of telling the truth without sentiment. They showed years of discipline, restraint, and careful planning. They also showed patterns, regular transfers, standing permissions, access I had granted without thinking it might one day be used against my own dignity. I did not change anything that day. I only asked questions, quiet ones, practical ones. What could be altered? What required notice? What was reversible and what was not? Knowledge first, action later. That has always been my way. On the walk home, I passed a bridal shop. The windows were full of white dresses and exaggerated joy. A group of young women stood outside, laughing, phones in hand, imagining futures that still believed love was always visible and always fair. I wished them well, genuinely. Life would teach them the rest. At home, the phone rang twice. I let it ring. No message was left. Silence, I have learned, is also a form of communication. I spent the afternoon sorting papers. Not dramatically, not with shaking hands. I simply put things back where they belonged. Old warranties I no longer needed. Instruction manuals for appliances long replaced. At the bottom of the drawer lay the envelope with my will. Thick paper. Legal language. A version of myself written at a time when I still assumed presence equaled appreciation. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't ready to read words written by a woman who still hoped to be chosen. In the evening, I cooked for one. Soup, the way my mother taught me. Slow, patient, forgiving. As I ate, I realized something else, equally important. My son hadn't just excluded me from a wedding. He had made a decision about where I belonged. And for the first time, I was considering whether I agreed with him. I washed the dishes, dried them carefully, and placed them back in the cupboard. Order has always calmed me. Before bed, I wrote a short list on a piece of paper. Names, appointments, tasks, not revenge, preparation. When I turned off the light, the house felt the same, but I did not. I felt like someone who had finally stopped waiting to be invited and started deciding where she would stand. Sleep came easily again. By the third day, the news had settled into my bones the way weather does before a storm. Not dramatic, predictable. People imagine betrayal arrives loudly. It doesn't. It arrives as confirmation of things you already knew, but were polite enough not to say out loud. My son did not call. That, too, told me something. I went about my routines. Watered the plants. Folded laundry I no longer separated by his and mine. When you live alone long enough, you stop pretending space is temporary. It becomes honest. Around noon, I drove across town to the small office building near the courthouse. Beige walls, low ceilings, the kind of place that never tries to impress anyone. My lawyer had worked there for decades. He had helped me after my husband died, helped me set things up so I would never have to ask my child for help in my old age. Irony has patience. He looked older than I remembered. So did I. We greeted each other without warmth or distance. Two people who understood why the meeting mattered. "I'd like to review my will," I said. He didn't ask why. Good lawyers rarely do. Instead, he asked when it was last updated. I told him. He nodded, already knowing the answer before I finished. Wills written by hopeful parents all sound the same. As he retrieved the file, I studied my hands. They were steady. These hands had scrubbed floors, counted cash late at night, signed contracts I barely understood at the time but honored anyway. They had held my son when he was small and incapable of smirking at anyone. We read through the document together, clause by clause, beneficiaries, contingencies, assumptions. It was written by a woman who believed effort was always seen, who believed proximity guaranteed loyalty, who assumed gratitude matured naturally like fruit on a tree. I asked questions, practical ones. What could be changed immediately? What required witnesses? What protections could be put in place? I did not raise my voice. I did not speak of feelings. This was not about punishment. It was about accuracy. He watched me carefully, then said, "You seem very certain." I smiled, not proudly, simply honestly. I've never been more precise. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. The cashier chatted about the upcoming wedding season, how exhausting it must be to host family from out of town. I nodded politely. There is no need to burden strangers with truths they cannot carry. That evening, my phone finally rang. My son's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Old habits die slowly. He sounded distracted, busy. He asked how I was doing, then moved quickly to discussing seating arrangements, timing, logistics. He spoke as if the matter were already settled, as if exclusion were just another detail I should accept quietly. I listened. I did not interrupt. At the end, he said, "You understand, right?" I looked around my living room. The framed photos. The lamp I repaired myself instead of replacing. The life I built without shortcuts. "Yes," I said. "I understand." Relief flooded his voice. He thanked me. Thanked me for being reasonable. After we hung up, I sat very still. Reasonable, I realized, is often what people call you when you make their choices easier. It has nothing to do with fairness. I took out the list I had written days earlier. I added one more name, one more appointment. Outside, the evening was quiet. Somewhere across town, my son was planning a celebration that required my absence. He believed the hardest part was over. He was wrong, but not in the way people usually are. This would not end loudly. It would end correctly. I turned off the light, leaving the list on the table where I could see it in the morning. Decisions made in daylight deserve to rest at night. The wedding was 4 days away when he came to see me again. He didn't call first. He never does when he thinks he has the right to enter a space. I heard his car before the knock, the engine cutting off too sharply, like impatience disguised as urgency. I opened the door before he rang the bell. He looked surprised. People often are when they expect resistance and meet readiness instead. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes moved quickly over the room, as if checking whether anything had changed. It hadn't. That seemed to unsettle him more than disorder would have. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right," he said. His tone was careful, practiced. "This week must be strange for you." I nodded, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. "It is a week," I said, "like any other." He smiled, relieved by my calm. Calm reassures people who are doing something cruel. It tells them they won't be held accountable emotionally. He sat at the table where he used to do homework, where I once taught him how to count change properly so customers wouldn't cheat him at the shop. He folded his hands and leaned forward, adopting the posture of a man about to make a reasonable request. "I wanted to talk about a few practical things," he said, "just in case." There it was. Practical. The word men use when they want something but don't want to ask. He spoke about travel arrangements for relatives, about final payments, about how complicated weddings are, financially speaking. He never mentioned love. He never mentioned vows. Only logistics. Only money. At one point he said, "You've always been so good at handling these things." I looked at him carefully then. Really looked. At the confident set of his jaw. At the ease with which he occupied the space. At the faint irritation beneath his politeness, like a child afraid his allowance might be delayed. "I've handled my own things," I corrected quietly. He waved it off with a small laugh. "You know what I mean." Yes, I did. He asked if I had received all the information I needed, if I was comfortable staying home that day, if I had someone to call if I felt lonely. Each question was wrapped in concern, but aimed at reassurance for himself, not me. I answered simply, briefly. I did not explain myself. Explanation invites negotiation. Then he said the thing he had really come to say. "We'll talk properly after the wedding," he said, "when everything settles down." After. Always after. After the event. After the damage. After the moment when speaking up would have mattered. I stood and began clearing the already clean table. This unsettled him. He preferred me seated, listening, available. "There's nothing we need to talk about later," I said. He frowned slightly. "Of course there is. We're family." I turned to face him. My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "Families talk before decisions," I said. "Not after." For the first time, his smile faltered. Just a little. Enough to show confusion. He was not used to resistance that did not announce itself loudly. He stood as well, suddenly uneasy. "You're not upset, are you?" I thought about that. About how people mistake dignity for indifference. "No," I said. "I'm attentive." That word landed differently. He didn't like it. Attentive suggests observation, memory, consequence. He left shortly after. He hugged me, briefly, awkwardly. His mind was already elsewhere, arranging flowers, rehearsing speeches, stepping into a future where my presence was unnecessary. When the door closed, I did not rush to sit down. I remained standing for a moment, listening to the quiet. Quiet reveals things noise hides. I went to my desk and opened the drawer. Inside lay the papers I had reviewed days earlier, neatly stacked, waiting. I added a note to the top, a reminder to myself, written in steady handwriting: "Do not confuse calm with consent." Then I closed the drawer. That evening, I slept without dreams. Not because there was nothing left to process, but because my mind had finally stopped arguing with reality. The day of the wedding arrived quietly for me. No rush. No dress hanging on the door. No schedule to obey. I woke at my usual hour, made my bed, and opened the curtains just enough to let the morning in without inviting it to stay. Somewhere across town, people were already adjusting flowers and checking seating charts. Somewhere, my son was tying a tie he didn't know how to knot without help. I wondered briefly who was standing close enough to fix it for him. I made coffee instead of tea that morning. Strong, bitter, honest. I drank it slowly at the kitchen table, listening to the house breathe. Old houses do that. They settle, creak, remind you they are still alive even when others forget. At 10, the phone buzzed. A message from him, short. "We're starting soon. Hope you're doing okay." No apology, no hesitation. A courtesy notification, like an automated reminder. I placed the phone face down and did not reply. I spent the late morning walking through rooms that held no secrets from me. The bedroom where I had slept alone for years without complaint. The spare room he once claimed would be his if he ever needed it, though he never did. The small back room where I kept my documents, organized carefully, because chaos has a way of finding widows. Around noon, I dressed. Not in mourning, not in celebration. Just clean clothes and a coat that fit me properly. I had an appointment. The notary's office was calm, professional. The kind of place where people spoke softly because words carried weight there. I signed what needed signing. Witnesses nodded. Pages were stamped. Nothing dramatic happened. No tears, no speeches. When it was done, I felt neither lighter nor heavier. I felt finished with something. On my way home, church bells rang. I didn't know which church. I didn't need to. Bells ring for many reasons. They are not always for you. Back in my kitchen, I heated soup and ate standing up. I have always eaten better standing. It keeps me from lingering in thoughts that no longer serve me. In the afternoon, I allowed myself one indulgence. I took out an old photo album, not to revisit memories, but to acknowledge them. I did not linger on images of him as a boy. I focused instead on myself, on the woman I had been before motherhood narrowed my definition. There I was, younger, standing beside a storefront I'd opened with my own money. There I was, tired but proud. There I was, complete. The phone rang again just after 3. This time he called. "Everything's going beautifully," he said, breathless. Music and voices hummed behind him. "I just wanted to check in." I could hear relief in his voice, like he was ticking off a final obligation. "I'm fine," I said. He paused, as if expecting more. Gratitude, perhaps, or reassurance. "Well," he said finally, "we'll talk after." "Yes," I replied. "After." We hung up. As evening settled in, I turned on a lamp and sat in my chair, the one by the window. Outside, neighbors passed, unaware that anything of importance had happened at all. That is how most turning points occur. Quietly. Unwitnessed. I did not imagine the wedding. I did not picture the bride or the guests. I did not wonder whether he missed me. That question no longer mattered. Instead, I looked at the folder on my desk. Closed. Final. Accurate. That night, while music played for others, I slept peacefully. Not because I had been excluded, but because I had finally excluded what no longer belonged in my life. The morning after the wedding felt no different at first. Same light through the curtains. Same ache in my knees when I stood up too quickly. The world is not obligated to mark your private conclusions. What changed was how I moved through it. I did not wait for a call. I did not check my phone every few minutes the way I used to, anticipating updates I pretended I didn't care about. I made breakfast, washed the cup, and sat down with my papers spread neatly across the table. Today was for follow-through. At 9 sharp, I called the bank. The woman who answered knew my name. She always did. I asked to speak with the advisor who handled long-term accounts. When he came on the line, his voice was warm, professional, steady. People like that are trained to hear finality before it's spoken. "I'd like to review access permissions on my accounts," I said. There was a pause. Not alarmed, just attentive. "I want to know exactly who can see what," I continued, "and how quickly that can change." He explained. I listened. I asked him to repeat certain points, not because I didn't understand, but because repetition clarifies intention. Automatic transfers. Emergency authorizations. Standing permissions granted years ago, when my son still asked instead of assumed. By the end of the call, we had a list. A precise one. "Would you like to make changes now?" he asked. "Not all of them," I said. "Not yet." He accepted that without question. Money professionals understand timing. Power lies not in haste, but in sequence. When I hung up, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not bitterness. Control. Quiet and complete. Late that morning, a delivery arrived. A large envelope from the wedding planner. Inside was a polite note thanking me for my support and enclosing copies of finalized invoices. They had my name on them, no confusion there. I looked at the total without flinching. Numbers only sting when you pretend not to see them. I placed the envelope beside the others. At noon, my son finally called again. His voice sounded different now, less buoyant. The performance was over. "Well," he said, forcing a laugh, "it's done. We survived." "I'm sure you did," I replied. He talked for a while, about guests, about speeches, about how exhausting it all was. He never once asked how my day had been. That, too, was familiar. Then he cleared his throat. "There are a few things we should go over," he said. "Some of the expenses came in higher than expected." Of course they did. He spoke carefully now, testing ground he believed still belonged to him. I let him finish. Silence has a way of unsettling people who rely on momentum. When he stopped talking, I said, "I'm aware." "You are?" His relief was immediate. "Good. I thought maybe we could sit down next week and—" "No," I said gently. The word surprised him. It always does. "No?" he repeated. "I won't be going over anything next week," I said. "Or the week after." A pause. Longer this time. "What do you mean?" His voice tightened. "These are things we need to handle." "They are things you need to handle," I corrected. "I'm done handling them." He laughed, sharp and short. "Come on, you don't mean that." I looked out the window while he spoke, watching a bird hop along the fence, completely uninterested in our conversation. "I mean exactly what I say," I replied. There was irritation now, barely contained. "You're upset," he said. "This is about the wedding." "No," I said again. "This is about the years before it." That silenced him. He did not have a script for that sentence. He ended the call soon after, promising we'd talk later. He always promises that. It costs him nothing. I set the phone down and returned to my papers. I made notes, checked dates, lined up steps. Nothing rushed, nothing impulsive. That afternoon, I scheduled one more appointment, the most important one. I did not feel cruel. I did not feel vengeful. I felt accurate. And accuracy, I have learned, frightens people far more than anger ever could. By the time my appointment day arrived, the urgency had drained out of everything. That is how you know you are ready. Decisions made in panic always ask to be undone. Decisions made in calm ask only to be respected. The office was on the third floor of an old building downtown. no elevator. I took the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, not because I was weak, but because I have learned that haste is rarely rewarded at my age. The plaque on the door was modest. No grand name, just a profession and a surname. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and furniture polish. The man who greeted me was younger than my son, which amused me. Age rearranges authority in unexpected ways. He did not talk down to me. He did not soften his words. That alone told me I had chosen correctly. We sat across from each other, a wide desk between us. I placed my folder down and opened it myself. I prefer to control the order in which things are revealed. I want to make sure my wishes are followed exactly, I said. Not emotionally, legally. He nodded. He had heard that sentence before, though perhaps not from someone with my tone. People expect grief or anger. They don't expect precision. We went through everything, slowly. Assets, accounts, property, contingencies. I answered questions clearly, sometimes correcting his assumptions before he finished forming them. He learned quickly not to interrupt. At one point he said, "You know this may come as a surprise to your son." I looked at him without expression. My son has confused surprise with consequence for most of his life, I said. I'm correcting that. There was no judgment in the room after that, only work. We discussed protections, structures that prevent reinterpretation, clauses that leave no room for persuasion later. I was not interested in drama after my time was done. I wanted silence, finality, a clean line no one could step over. When he asked if I wanted to leave a letter, I declined. I've spent years explaining myself, I said. Anyone who still doesn't understand isn't confused. They're unwilling. He accepted that. When I left, the sun had shifted. Late afternoon light has a different quality, less forgiving, more honest. I walked 2 blocks to my car and sat there for a moment before turning the key, letting the quiet settle. On the drive home, my phone buzzed twice. Messages this time. From him. The first was short. "Can you call me when you have a minute?" The second arrived 5 minutes later. "This is important." I did not respond. At home, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the sink, drinking it slowly. My hands were steady, my breathing even. Whatever storm he was experiencing, it was not mine to manage anymore. That evening, I received a message from someone else, a distant relative congratulating me on my son's beautiful wedding and asking how proud I must be. I replied politely, "Pride, like love, does not need to be announced to be real." I spent the rest of the night doing ordinary things, folding laundry, reading a few pages of a book I had started months ago and never finished. Ordinary things become precious when you stop performing for others. Before bed, I checked my calendar. The next weeks were mostly empty. No obligations written in pencil, ready to be erased if someone else's needs changed. Just my handwriting. Firm. Inked. As I turned off the light, I realized something else had changed. I was no longer bracing myself for the next conversation. I was no longer rehearsing explanations in my head. He would call again. Of that I was sure. When people sense control slipping, they reach for noise. But I was done responding to noise. I lay in the dark and felt an unfamiliar sensation settle over me. Not loneliness, not regret. Space. And for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me. The silence did not last long. It never does when someone believes silence is a mistake that must be corrected. 3 days after my appointment, my son arrived again. This time he called from the driveway. Progress, of a sort. "I'm outside," he said. We need to talk. Need is such a demanding word. I looked at the clock before answering. Late afternoon. I told him he could come in. He entered the house differently now, slower, more cautious, as if the walls themselves might object to him. He stood instead of sitting, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. Weddings give people confidence, but only temporarily. Reality has a way of reclaiming its ground. I've been trying to reach you, he began. You haven't been answering. I know, I said. That unsettled him. He expected excuses, a forgotten phone, a misunderstanding, not acknowledgement. He exhaled sharply and finally sat down. You're shutting me out, he said. I considered that. No, I replied. I'm stepping back. He frowned. What's the difference? The difference, I said, is intention. He leaned forward now, irritation breaking through the restraint. You're acting like something terrible happened. Something terrible did happen, I thought. But I did not say it. Instead, I said, I'm acting like something accurate happened. He shook his head, a humorless laugh escaping him. You're being dramatic. I smiled then, not widely, just enough. I didn't raise you to confuse calm with drama. That struck him harder than anger would have. He opened his mouth, closed it again, tried a different approach. We're family, he said. You don't just disappear when things get uncomfortable. I looked at him steadily. I didn't disappear, I said. You decided where I belonged. I listened. His jaw tightened. You're twisting this. No, I said. I'm clarifying it. He stood abruptly and paced the room. He talked about stress, about expectations, about how hard it is to build a life that looks respectable. He spoke as if respect were something fragile, easily damaged by proximity to the wrong person. You don't understand the world I live in, he said finally. I nodded. And you never asked to understand mine. That stopped him. He turned toward me, truly looking this time, perhaps for the first time in years. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. I believed him. That was the problem. You didn't mean not to, I replied. The room went quiet. He sat back down, suddenly tired. So what now? He asked. Are you punishing me? No, I said. I'm adjusting my expectations. He looked at me as if I'd spoken another language. I spent years preparing you for independence, I continued. I didn't realize I was also training myself to be unnecessary. That's not fair, he said. I know, I answered. Fairness was never the standard here. He asked then carefully, did you change something, legally? I met his eyes. I did not lie. I organize my affairs, I said, as I see fit. His breath caught, just slightly. Fear has a sound when it enters a room. You didn't have to do anything so extreme, he said. Extreme. Another convenient word. I did nothing suddenly, I said. I did something deliberately. He stood again, anger rising now, no longer hidden. You're doing this to make a point. I shook my head. I'm doing this because I finally listened to one. He left not long after that, not slamming the door, not apologizing either. He left with confusion on his face, the kind that comes when control no longer answers to you. That evening, I sat alone and thought about the boy he had been, the man he became, the distance between those things. I did not mourn. I acknowledged. I took out my folder one last time and checked that everything was in order. It was. Before bed, I wrote a single sentence on a fresh page and placed it inside. Dignity does not beg to be included. I slept well. He waited exactly 1 week before calling again. 7 days is how long he needs to convince himself that I will soften. That pattern has been reliable for decades. This time his voice was controlled, almost pleasant. Too pleasant. He asked how I was feeling. He asked if I needed anything. He even asked about my health. Each question was placed carefully, like stepping stones across water he didn't want to fall into. Then he said, "We should meet somewhere neutral." Neutral is what people ask for when they know they no longer have the upper hand. We met at a cafe near his office. Modern, glass walls. Too loud for real conversation, which suited him fine. Public places make people behave. He ordered for both of us without asking. Old habits reveal themselves when people are nervous. He didn't waste time. "There's been some confusion," he said, lowering his voice, "with the bank." I stirred my tea slowly. "Confusion usually comes from assumptions," I replied. His jaw tightened. "Some payments didn't go through." "Yes, that's a problem," he said flatly. "Things were arranged a certain way." "They were arranged," I agreed. "By me, for a long time." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You can't just pull support without warning." I looked at him across the small table, at the expensive watch on his wrist, at the suit he liked to think separated him from where he came from. "I didn't," I said. "I stopped continuing it." He scoffed, quietly. "That's the same thing." "No," I said. "One is abandonment, the other is completion." He stared at me, searching for the version of me that would explain, justify, soften the truth. That woman was no longer available. "We have commitments," he said. "Mortgage, plans, expectations." I nodded. "So do I." He laughed then, sharp and bitter. "You don't need the money. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Teaching me a lesson." I took a sip of tea. It had gone lukewarm. "I don't need revenge either," I said. Yet here we are. People at nearby tables pretended not to listen. Everyone listens. "You're acting like I did something unforgivable," he continued. "It was a wedding. One day." "It wasn't one day," I said. "It was a decision." His voice rose despite himself. "I said you wouldn't be comfortable." "And I said nothing," I replied. "You mistook that for agreement." He rubbed his forehead, the way he used to as a boy when he couldn't force a problem to bend. "So what do you want?" There it was. The question he always asks when he believes everything has a price. I met his eyes. "I want you to live the life you chose," I said, "without my adjustments." He went quiet. Truly quiet this time. "You can't seriously expect me to manage all of this alone," he said finally. I tilted my head slightly. "You've been managing without me publicly for years. This just makes it honest." The word landed between us like a closed door. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "You're being cold?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm being consistent." He looked down at me, anger and disbelief tangled together. "You're my mother." "Yes," I said. "Not your contingency plan." He left without paying for the tea. I covered it myself. I always do. As I walked home later, the evening air felt sharp and clean. I realized something important then. He wasn't angry because he missed me. He was angry because he was afraid of standing on his own without the quiet safety net he never acknowledged. That night, I marked one more item off my list. A small one, administrative, necessary. I was not dismantling his life. I was removing myself from the parts he had already decided did not require me. And for the first time, that felt not only fair, but inevitable. By the 10th day after the wedding, the tone changed. not in words, but in rhythm. My son stopped calling to argue and started calling to negotiate. That is always the second phase. He came again, this time with papers in his hand. Printed emails, statements, numbers highlighted in yellow as if color could turn dependence into urgency. "I brought this so you can see," he said, laying them out on my table without asking. "This isn't sustainable." I poured water into the kettle and waited for it to boil. I have learned that men who rush need time imposed on them. Silence does that better than lectures. "You've frozen things," he continued. "Some accounts, some transfers. The bank says it was your request." "Yes," I said, setting 2 cups on the table. "Mine." "You didn't warn me," he snapped. I turned to face him. "I warned you the moment you told me I didn't belong." He exhaled sharply, frustrated. "That's not how the world works." "No," I replied. "That's exactly how it works. Decisions have consequences. You just expected yours to land on me." He sat down heavily. For the first time, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with celebrations or stress. This was different. This was fear. "We're stretched," he said more quietly. "More than I thought." I waited. He needed to say it fully. "There are loans," he went on. "Short-term ones. Things I planned to cover once everything's settled." "And it hasn't," I said. He shook his head. "You've always helped." There it was. Not love, not remorse. History, weaponized. "Yes," I said. "And you've always expected it." "That's unfair," he protested. "I never forced you." I sat across from him then, close enough that he could see I was not angry. That unsettled him more than anger ever had. "You didn't have to," I said. "Expectation can be quieter than force, but it's just as binding." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "So, what is this? Some kind of test?" I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said. "It's a boundary. You just met it late." He laughed bitterly. "At my age?" "At any age," I replied. "Especially yours." He looked down at the papers. The yellow marks suddenly seemed childish. "If you don't step back in," he said, "things will get messy." "That's what happens when structures are built on assumptions," I said. "They wobble when removed." "You're willing to watch me struggle?" he asked, incredulous. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm willing to watch you learn." The words hung between us, heavy, irrevocable. "You're enjoying this," he accused. I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm enduring it. There's a difference." He stood abruptly, pacing again. "You raised me to succeed." "I raised you to stand," I corrected. "You chose to lean." He stopped moving. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, cornered by a truth he didn't know how to argue with. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. I did not hesitate. "Take responsibility. Fully. Without cushioning it with my silence or my savings." "And if I can't?" "Then you will adapt," I said. "Like everyone else." He stared at me, searching for mercy. I did not offer it. Mercy without accountability only repeats the cycle. He gathered his papers, slower now, less dramatic. "You've changed," he said. I nodded. "So have you." I just noticed first. At the door, he hesitated. "This will change things between us." "Yes," I said. "It already has." After he left, I sat down and felt the tremor in my hands finally arrive. Not regret, release. Holding boundaries takes strength, and strength always demands its due afterward. I breathed through it. Let it pass. That evening, I received a message from the bank confirming the final adjustments. Everything was now exactly as intended: clear, contained, unreachable. I placed the confirmation with the rest of my documents and closed the folder. I was not cutting him off from love. I was cutting him off from entitlement. There is a difference children only learn when their parents finally stop pretending there isn't, and I had stopped pretending. After that conversation, a strange quiet settled between us. Not peace, not reconciliation, something thinner, like the pause after a door closes, but before you decide whether to knock again. He did not call for several days. That was new. I suspected he was busy recalculating, calling banks, postponing payments, discovering how heavy a life feels when it no longer floats on someone else's restraint. I, on the other hand, felt lighter, not relieved. Lighter in the way one feels after setting down a bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. On the 5th day, I went to my doctor. A routine appointment I had postponed more than once because my son might need me. The doctor scolded me gently for that. He has known me long enough to do so without offense. My blood pressure was high, then lower after a second reading. Stress, he said. I nodded. Stress does not always come from noise. Sometimes it comes from swallowing things that should have been said aloud years earlier. On the way home, I stopped at the park. I sat on a bench and watched a grandmother chase a small boy with a paper airplane. He laughed freely, without calculation. I wondered how long it would be before he learned what was expected of him and what he could safely expect in return. That evening, my phone rang again. I knew before looking who it was. This time, his voice was subdued. No sharp edges, no strategies. I'm not calling to argue, he said quickly. I just wanted to tell you I've been thinking. I waited. Thinking, in his case, often meant rearranging blame. I didn't realize how much I relied on you, he continued. I guess I thought it would always be there. There it was, not an apology, a realization. Those arrive late, but they still matter. I know, I said. He was silent for a moment. Then, quieter. I don't know how to fix this. I leaned back in my chair. You don't fix it, I said. You live differently going forward. That might take time, he said. Yes, I agreed. It usually does. He sighed. You could help. Just for a while. There it was again. The old reflex. I did not judge him for it. Habits learned early are difficult to abandon. I already helped, I said. For years. And now? Now, I said. I let you become who you claim to be. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was tight. You make it sound like I'm weak. No, I said. I make it sound like you're responsible. That ended the call. Not angrily. Just finished. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened a smaller folder I hadn't touched in some time. Inside were documents related to a trust I had established quietly, years ago, with a modest sum intended for future family needs. I had not told him about it. I had believed secrecy would protect it from expectation. I read through the papers carefully. Then I made a note in the margin, a change of purpose, a redirection. Still generous, still thoughtful, but no longer automatic. I sealed the folder again. I did not feel cruel. I felt aligned. The next morning, a message arrived from him. Short, careful. I'm trying. I hope you know that. I stared at the words for a long moment before replying. I see effort, I wrote back. That's new. Keep going. No hearts. No softening, just truth. I put the phone down and went about my day. Laundry, lunch, a walk, life, unburdened by constant vigilance. That afternoon, I realized something quietly important. Whatever happens next, whether he adapts or resents, whether we grow closer or further apart, my footing no longer depends on his approval. I am not waiting to be forgiven for demanding respect. I am simply living as if it were always required. And that, I suspect, is what finally makes people notice. Time has a way of revealing what words cannot. In the weeks that followed, I watched my son learn this slowly, awkwardly, the way grown men do when no one is cushioning the fall anymore. He stopped calling every few days. Instead, the messages came farther apart. Short updates, factual, less emotional. He no longer asked for help outright. That was progress, even if it was born from necessity rather than insight. I, meanwhile, paid attention to my body. The doctor had been right. Stress had been living in me quietly, like a tenant who never paid rent but took up space anyway. As it loosened its grip, I felt small changes. I slept through the night more often. My appetite returned, not ravenous, just steady. I walked longer without feeling exhausted. One morning, I sorted through old mail and found a card he had sent me years ago. Mother's Day. A store-bought message about appreciation and sacrifice. I remembered how pleased I had been to receive it, how I placed it on the mantel like proof that I still mattered. I threw it away, not out of bitterness, out of honesty. Gratitude that needs reminders is not gratitude. It is maintenance. Later that week, I received an email from his wife. Polite, carefully worded. She thanked me for everything I had done and said she hoped there were no hard feelings. She suggested we meet for coffee sometime. I read the message twice. Hard feelings was an interesting phrase, as if dignity were an emotional inconvenience, like bruised pride that should eventually fade. I replied briefly, I wish you well. I'm focusing on my health and routines right now. It was true, and it was enough. On a quiet afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't planned to. My hands simply turned the wheel that way. I stood by my husband's grave and told him, out loud, that I had finally stopped fixing things that broke me in the process. I think you'd approve, I said. You always did hate imbalance. The wind moved through the trees. I took that as agreement. That evening, my son called again. Not to ask, not to negotiate, just to talk. I handled the loan, he said. Refinanced. It's tight, but manageable. That's good, I replied. He hesitated. It would have been easier if you'd stepped in. Yes, I said. That's why I didn't. A pause. Then, quieter. I get that now. I think. I didn't rush to reassure him. Understanding that comes without effort rarely lasts. We spoke for a few more minutes. About ordinary things. Weather, work, nothing heavy. When we hung up, I noticed something important. He had not asked me for anything. That night, I took out the envelope with my final arrangements. I read through them carefully, making sure every decision still felt like mine. They did. Each line reflected not anger, not disappointment, but clarity. I sealed the envelope again and placed it back where it belonged. I do not know what kind of man my son will become without my quiet corrections smoothing his path. That is his work now. What I do know is this. I no longer confuse love with sacrifice or presence with permission. I have given enough years to being useful. Now, I intend to be whole. And that, at my age, feels like the most honest inheritance I can leave behind. By the time autumn began to lean into the mornings, I felt the weight of finality approaching, not like a threat, but like a season doing what it was meant to do. I was 73 then, old enough to stop pretending time was generous, young enough to use what remained with intention. I made one last round of appointments, not because anything was wrong, but because loose ends irritate me more than illness ever did. The lawyer, the bank, the accountant. 3 rooms, 3 desks, 3 sets of eyes that looked at me with a mixture of respect and curiosity. People always expect regret at this stage. They expect tears. They expect hesitation. I gave them none. At the bank, the young manager asked if I wanted to reconsider one detail. A small clause, easily softened. It might feel less final, he said carefully. I smiled at him. Final is the point. He nodded and made the change permanent. At the lawyer's office, we reviewed everything again. Slowly, I insisted. Not because I doubted my choices, but because I wanted them heard aloud one last time, spoken into the air like facts, not emotions. Property, accounts, the trust, beneficiaries, conditions. Silence, where silence was deserved. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "You know, some parents do this out of anger." "I know," I replied. "That's why I waited until there was none left." On the way home, I stopped at a small bookstore I used to love but rarely visited anymore. I bought a novel I had already read years ago. There is comfort in returning to stories that do not surprise you. I have had enough surprises. That evening, my son came by. Unexpected, but no longer unsettling. He looked different these days. Thinner, quieter, less certain of his footing. That happens when safety nets disappear and people discover the ground beneath them is real. "I won't stay long," he said. "You never do," I replied, not unkindly. He sat across from me, hands folded, posture restrained. "I wanted to let you know," he said. "We're managing." I nodded. "Good." He hesitated. "It's harder than I thought." "Yes." He looked at me then. Really looked. "You knew this would happen." "I hoped it would," I said. "Hardship teaches faster than comfort." He swallowed. "I wish things hadn't gone this far." "So do I answered honestly. "But wishing is not a strategy." Silence settled between us. Not hostile, just full. "I don't know what will happen later," he said. "With us." I considered my answer carefully. Later depends on how you treat people when there's nothing left to take. That stayed with him. I could see it. When he left, I did not feel relief or sadness. I felt complete. A week later, I finalized one last instruction. A letter, not to him, but to the executor. Short, precise. No emotion, just context, just clarity. People who read wills look for loopholes. I gave them none. I placed everything in its place. Labeled, dated, signed, finished. That night, I sat in my chair by the window and watched the streetlights come on one by one. I thought about the wedding I never attended, about the woman I had been when exclusion still hurt more than it taught, about how easily love becomes leverage when you let it. I did not regret my son. I regretted only the years I mistook silence for grace. When I went to bed, I slept deeply, like someone who has said everything that needed to be said, not aloud, but in action. If this were the end, I thought, it would be enough. And if it were not, I was ready for whatever came next, standing exactly where I chose to stand. The reading of the will did not happen the way people imagine it does. There was no dramatic room full of relatives, no gasps, No raised voices. Real consequences rarely announce themselves. It happened on a Tuesday morning in a modest conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. I was not there. I had already said what I needed to say in life. What remained was administration. My son arrived early. He always does when he believes timing might work in his favor. He wore the same controlled expression I had seen so many times before, polite, contained, prepared to negotiate. His wife sat beside him, posture straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. She avoided looking at anyone directly. The executor greeted them calmly. No sympathy, no warmth, just procedure. They expected inheritance, not extravagance, but continuity. Access. The quiet assumption that what had always been available would remain so, simply because it always had. The folder was opened. The first pages were simple. Burial instructions. Modest. Thoughtful. Paid in advance. My son exhaled at that, a small sign of relief. Responsibility removed before it could inconvenience him. Then came the accounts. The executor read clearly, without emphasis. Properties listed. Funds allocated. Structures explained. Each sentence precise. Final. My son leaned forward slightly when he heard the word trust. His shoulders loosened. He glanced at his wife just briefly. A silent exchange of reassurance. Then the details followed. The trust existed, yes, long-standing, carefully protected, but not for him. It named beneficiaries who surprised him. A scholarship fund tied to a trade school, a community program for widowed women learning financial independence, a modest annual sum allocated for a purpose he had once dismissed as small-minded. There was no mention of his name. He interrupted then, just once. "There must be a mistake," he said. His voice was controlled, but it cracked at the edges. "I'm her only child." The executor looked at him steadily. There is no mistake. More pages. A final personal account, not large, deliberately so, left to him with conditions that were not cruel, but firm. No early access, no restructuring, no leverage. Enough to remind him he was not erased, but nowhere near enough to support the life he believed was his by default. Silence filled the room. His wife shifted in her seat. Her face had gone pale. She asked a question about adjustments, about discretion. The executor shook his head once. "These decisions were reviewed multiple times," he said. "They are explicit." My son stared at the table, not angry, not yet, confused. The kind of confusion that comes when the ground gives way without warning. Finally, the last document was read. A brief statement. Not a letter, not an apology. Just a declaration that I had made my decisions without resentment, that love did not require proximity, that respect was not inherited, but earned through behavior, not titles. That silence had once been my habit, and clarity was now my gift, to myself most of all. My son did not speak after that. When the meeting ended, he stood slowly. He did not argue. There was nothing left to argue with. Contracts do not care about raised voices. Outside, the day was ordinary. Traffic moved. People passed. Somewhere nearby, a couple laughed. Life did not pause for his understanding. Later, he would say he felt humiliated. Later, he would tell others he had been punished. But in that room, in that moment, something else settled in him. He realized I had not acted out of anger. I had acted without him in mind. That was the part he could not undo. And somewhere, in the quiet order of things, That realization did exactly what years of patience never had. I am not alive to see what comes after the reading of the will. That part belongs to others now. But I know how endings work. They do not shout. They settle. If I could speak one last time, it would not be to explain myself. I spent too many years doing that already. It would be to say this: I was never trying to hurt my son. I was trying to stop hurting myself. For a long time, I believed motherhood meant endurance, silence, adjustment. That if I bent enough, love would eventually meet me halfway. It took most of my life to understand that love, which only flows in one direction, is not love. It is habit. I think of the woman I was in my 40s, working long days, counting money twice because mistakes were expensive. I think of myself in my 60s, still saying yes when my body and spirit were saying no. I think of how easily I called that devotion. It was not devotion. It was fear of being unnecessary. My son did not become the way he was overnight. Neither did I. We built this dynamic together, brick by brick, silence by silence. The difference is that I was the one who eventually put the tools down. Some will say I went too far. Others will say I was finally brave. Neither matters much to me now. What matters is that, for the first time, my life ended in alignment with itself. I left no dramatic messages, no emotional pleas, just order, just truth, just consequences written in ink instead of tears. If my son learns from that, good. If he doesn't, that is no longer my failure to correct. What I know is this: dignity is not something you demand at the end. It is something you practice the moment you realize your worth does not depend on being included, invited, or needed. I was excluded from a wedding once. Quietly, casually, as if it were nothing. But I did not leave this world quietly. I left it whole. And if you are reading this as a woman who has swallowed too much for the sake of peace, let me say what no one said to me soon enough. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to be remembered not for what you gave away, but for what you finally protected. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and follow for more stories like this.